Welcome to Good Grief Mama. I'm Allie, wife and mom of 3, and this is a podcast for honest conversations about motherhood and marriage, homeschooling and homemaking. So if you've ever felt called to do motherhood or marriage just a little differently, or if you've ever wondered, why is no one talking about this? Then you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you're here. This episode is sponsored by Restore Your Core Physical Therapy. Mamas, you spend your days making sure everyone else is taken care of, but who's looking after you? The doctors of physical therapy at Restore Your Core PT get it. From pelvic floor therapy, infertility support, birth prep, and optimal fetal positioning to that nagging back, hip, or knee pain that you've been putting off. They've got you covered. All one-on-one care, all with a doctor who has time to really listen. With locations in Carmel, West Carmel, Zionsville, Brownsburg, and Greenwood, expert care is close by. Visit restoreyourcorept.com or call or text 317-597-6323. Make sure you mention the Good Grief Mama podcast to get $50 off a 90-minute evaluation or $25 off a 60-minute evaluation. You've been taking care of everyone else, and now it's your turn. All right, welcome back, Good Grief Mama listeners. So today is a very important episode. And the reason why I'm doing it is actually because of my husband. He is a very smart man. And a couple episodes back, he was like, I think that you should have done at the beginning of your episode, like, this is where my opinion is coming from, like a lay the scene, lay the stage of like, this is how I got to my opinion. And then I realized that would actually just be a good episode in general because I would have to do that for every single one of my episodes for it to make sense, I think, for me to lay the groundwork for where I came to this opinion that I'm sharing, because we all know that I'm a very opinionated person. And so I wanted to do an episode on basically just the foundation behind the opinions that I have and where I get them from on motherhood, on marriage, and just in life in general. So you hear my opinions a lot. And now it's time to hear where I get them from. So as I have said, I have strong opinions about motherhood, about marriage, homeschooling, parenting, our entertainment, our priorities. I mean, all the things. And I don't want this podcast to just be a collection of my opinions, because my opinions aren't really the foundation. There is a framework behind my opinions and the decisions that I make. And there's a reason for the decisions that I make. And when I make a decision or form an opinion, I am not primarily asking, what does everyone else do? Or what would make my kids the happiest? Or what's easiest? Or what is culturally normal? What do I feel like doing? Those are not the questions that I'm asking when I'm forming an opinion about something or making a decision on something. I am primarily asking, what does God want from me in this aspect, in this topic, in this area? What do I feel like God is calling me to do? So today I want to explain the lens through which I make decisions, because I feel like once you understand that, then a lot of my opinions will make sense. The foundation for decisions that I make is that Jesus comes first. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I wonder why she makes that decision, or, I just don't understand how she got to this opinion. The answer to most of those questions will be and come back to the fact that I have a relationship with Jesus, that I'm a Christian, and that's where most of my opinions and decisions will filter back to. So that doesn't mean, before I start talking about anything, that does not mean that I have everything figured out, that my interpretation of my faith and the decisions that I make based on that is the only way for someone to do something. Like every Christian family needs to look exactly like ours if they're true Christians. That's not what I'm saying. And that definitely doesn't mean that our family does everything perfect, because that's far from it. But that does mean that I believe in a source of truth outside of myself and my feelings. And that's a really important distinction, because my decision-making is not what do I think is best? It is, what do I believe that scripture is teaching, and how do I live that out? So when that comes to motherhood, right? Motherhood and marriage are a big part of this podcast, doing motherhood and marriage differently. So when it comes to motherhood, I am not primarily trying to make my kids happy. My goal is to make them holy. My goal is that I want them to love Jesus. My goal is that I want them to have a strong relationship with him and to be able to share that love then with other people and to eventually raise their kids to do the same. And that doesn't mean that I don't care about their happiness. That doesn't mean that I don't want them to have fun. That doesn't mean that their childhood shouldn't be joyful. But it does mean that to me, their eternal relationship with Jesus matters more than their temporary happiness. And so that explains our decisions. And like all this, I'm saying me. But this is a thing that is common between my husband and I. But I will continue speaking from my perspective. But that explains our decision about things like sports, like not signing up for sports that have Sunday morning games, or if we are a part of a sport that does, not going to the Sunday morning games, because we believe that church is more important than a sports game. Not because sports are bad, but because we've decided what has the ultimate importance here. That would explain things like including Bible in our homeschooling. I'm not just adding Bible in because it's another subject to do. I don't think that our faith should be compartmentalized to church. I think that it should be a part of our everyday life. When we're learning about nature, why not learn about the man who created nature? When we're doing math, when we're reading, all these things should include our faith in it. Who made the world? Who are we in relation to that? They're the foundational truths, and how should we live accordingly? That also explains the decisions that we make about protecting our children's hearts and their minds, including monitoring things like movies that they watch or TV shows that they watch or books that they're allowed to read, video games they're allowed to play, music they can listen to, that kind of stuff. It's not merely, is this an appropriate age for them to be doing this? It's, what is this teaching my child to love? Is this show teaching my child to love themselves more than other people? Is this, video game teaching them to love violence? Is it taking their attention so much and capturing their heart so much that it's pulling it away from the Lord? And so just because something is technically kid-friendly doesn't mean that it's not shaping their worldview or affecting their hearts in ways that are not good. This then explains, like my Granny Ways series, when I was talking about legacy, this then explains I'm not just raising children, I'm raising future adults who will raise children. Bringing it back to that Granny Ways series, the legacy that I'm leaving is not just money and possessions, accomplishments and degrees and vacations and beautiful homes. It's not just leaving success. It's, I want my children to love Jesus, and I want my grandchildren to love Jesus and their children. And you know what I mean? I want it to be a legacy of faith. And so that gives my motherhood a much longer horizon than simply just getting through today. So my foundational belief in Jesus does affect many of my parenting decisions. And again, I'm saying my, but the decisions that we make for our children are me and Nathan together. But speaking from my perspective. So it also affects the beliefs that I have and opinions that I have about marriage. The way that I view marriage makes a lot more sense when you understand that I don't believe that marriage exists primarily for my happiness. This might be where some feathers got a little ruffled with my previous fight for your marriage episode. But it's because I believe that my marriage exists to glorify God, not to make myself happy. And when I believe in that way, I believe that my marriage has a hierarchy, or there's a hierarchy of importance in my life. And it should be God first, then my husband, then my children, and then extended family, friends, all the things below. And that doesn't mean that my children aren't important and I'm going to neglect their needs, but it does mean that that is the importance level in my life. And it's about order and responsibility. And I believe that there are biblical roles in marriage and that God created men and women to have equal value, but to have different roles. And so accordingly, I believe that my husband is the head of our household. And that doesn't mean that he's to do whatever he wants and be a dictator. But that does mean that his leadership comes with responsibility. It comes with sacrifice for our family, service to our family, and ultimately accountability to God, which is why I believe I mentioned in a few of these episodes most recently, I thought long and hard about who I was going to marry because I knew that that is the role that I wanted my husband to have, was the head of our household. And so I wanted to make sure that my husband, that whoever I chose for my husband, loved God because if I'm going to ultimately submit to him, I need to know that he's submitting to God. And that looks like submission for a wife, but that doesn't mean to me that I'm less valuable because I believe that God made men and women equal value, but different roles. And so that affects my opinions on marriage. I believe that my husband and I don't have to fight over who gets the final say because I've already decided and what I believe that God designs for marriage. And we agree on that. So a lot of my opinions about marriage come from this foundational relationship with Jesus. That also would help probably people understand my opinions and what we have chosen to do as far as boundaries around our marriage. It's been a while, I think, since I've talked about this on the podcast, but both Nathan and I waited to have sex until we were married. Not that we just waited with each other. We waited in general. Like we were both virgins when we got married. And it was not some kind of random rule that we followed. It came from an understanding of God's design for sex and marriage. And that same framework then we've carried with us after marriage too, as far as intentionally putting boundaries around our marriage, like we shared in the last week's episode. I re-released an episode about having a healthy marriage and how they don't happen by accident. That's because I don't believe that fidelity or infidelity, I guess, starts when someone cheats. I believe you protect your marriage. You put boundaries around your marriage before you're ever even tempted to destroy it. And so, that helps you to get a framework for where we made our decisions about emotional boundaries and opposite sex friendships. And, we don't watch, we monitor what we watch. Like as far as rated R movies, we pay attention to why is it rated R? Is there a lot of nudity? I know that what is the show? Game of Thrones or whatever was super popular a while back. It might still be. I don't know. But we didn't watch it because from what I heard, at least, there's a lot of nudity in it. And it affects our decisions about how we talk about our spouse, how we talk about our husband, as far as me, how we handle conflict. And, it shapes the foundation of what I believe about marriage and the decisions that we make about marriage and making our marriage a priority, especially when it comes to the overarching belief that our marriage should be a testimony and should glorify God. My marriage isn't just about, am I happy? My marriage is about, what does this marriage say about God? We want our marriage to glorify God, demonstrate what a covenant looks like. We want to show our children what marriage should look like. We want to demonstrate forgiveness and commitment and sacrifice and respect and show our children what a husband and wife should do. And that doesn't mean that our marriage is perfect, because it is not. It looks like our marriage we're building this in front of our children. And it's not something that we're hiding behind closed doors. We're working it out in front of our kids so that they can see this is what a healthy marriage looks like, something that they want in their lives. Again, not because our marriage is perfect, because it is not, but it is something that we are working on to glorify God, because nobody is perfect except for God. And so we want our marriage to be a testament to that, to show what that relationship can look like and just to glorify God. So, like I said, this framework for my opinions affects literally everything. And so, in every aspect, like homeschooling, we homeschool not because we like it, but because we're trying to come up with what is the best educational environment for our kids, to disciple our kids and to fulfill what we believe is our responsibility as parents that we've been given from God, and to pay attention to who's influencing our children. that affects my homemaking, because it's not that I need to do everything perfectly. It's, I believe that caring for my family and caring for my home is meaningful work. It's affects motherhood, like I've talked about. It's not how do I make today easier? It's what kind of woman and mother is God calling me to be? It affects my marriage again, like not how do I make myself or my husband happy? It's how can I love and serve my husband while honoring God? And parenting, like how do we, it's not how do I keep my child from ever being uncomfortable? It's what does my child need to learn? What will help them to be a better human and to, have a better relationship with God? So my values determine my priorities determine the decisions that I make and the opinions that I form. And I think that that's an important thing for my listeners to understand, because I think it will give you a better understanding for where I'm coming from when I share my opinions. And I'm not saying that you have to agree with me. I'm not sharing this because I think everyone listening needs to make every decision exactly the way that I do. That would be very prideful of me. I'm sharing it because I think it's important to be honest about the foundation underneath what I say when I'm sharing my opinions. If you disagree with one of my opinions, totally okay. But I want you to understand that you're not just disagreeing with like a random opinion. I'm not just popping out opinions right out of my brain for no reason. I am forming them from a foundation. And so if there's something you disagree with, that's totally fine. But I hope that it leads you to then think, what's the foundation underneath why I make decisions? Because as we're all on this journey as moms and wives and just women in general, because majority of my listeners are women, I want you to be thinking, why am I wanting to do motherhood and marriage differently? And how do I make good decisions? And I believe for me, I make those decisions through my faith. And that is how I am trying to do motherhood and marriage differently. Not trying to be perfect, not saying that I'm perfect. Things may change, my decisions and opinions may change, but when I'm making those decisions, this is where I'm coming from. So I hope that helps. And now if you need to go back and re-listen to all of my episodes, then maybe you'll have a different ear to hear it from, a different lens to see it from. But going forward, know that this is the foundation that I am speaking from when I speak my opinions and share my thoughts on how we can do this motherhood and marriage thing differently. So if you're still here, I want you to subscribe to my email subscription. I want you to click rating and review, leave me a rating and review, comment, share it with your friends, and I will be back next week.